I'd never been a morning person, never had the urge to witness the glory of a sunrise or hear the first chirps of early birds proclaiming their territories. No, mornings and I had a mutual understanding. They let me sleep, and I'd begrudgingly exist during the later hours. When we moved to Dermore Cove, a sleepy cliffside town, it was the sea air I blamed for the lethargy that deepened my natural aversion to dawn. We bought this rundown, charming in its own way cottage, where the previous occupants were more interested in leaving quickly than they were in fetching a high price. I didn't question their haste. Cities spew out overworked souls like clockwork, eager for any escape. This morning, however, something was off as I laid in bed, the digital clock on my bedside blinking an ungodly 5:14 a.m. Normally, it's the sea waves that creep through my open window, a sort of natural lull that beats any medicated sleep aid. But the waves sounded muted, tentative almost, as if they too recoiled from something unseen. Dragging myself out of bed, I shuffled to the kitchen, toes curling on the cold wooden floor. The kettle whistled a greeting that seemed sharper than usual. As I waited for my coffee, I thought about checking online job listings. That's when I smelled it, salty, yes, but with a putrid tweak, like seaweed left to rot under the hot sun, which was odd given the season. Mug in hand, I walked over to the window, rubbing sleep from my eyes as I squinted out towards the cliff's edge visible from our backyard. But it wasn't the view that caught my attention. It was the way my neighbor, Keith, stood at his fence, just staring blankly out towards the horizon. Hell, the man looked like he hadn't blinked since last Tuesday. Not completely abnormal for old sea dogs in these parts, but something felt wrong. I considered opening the window to shout a lukewarm joke about his early bird routine, but a chill raced down my spine, warning me to shut up. Instead, I watched, sipping the bitter coffee, feeling the heat sear my lips. Keith slowly turned his head towards my window. Our eyes locked, and for a second, I could swear there was nothing inside him. Just hollow. Then he smiled, a slow, crooked curl of his lips that didn't reach his eyes, and lifted a hand, waving it erratically before turning back to his vigil of the sea. Determined to clear my head of the morning's oddities, I decided on a walk, a very quick, very caffeinated walk. Grabbing a coat, I stepped outside where the air clung to my skin, heavy with moisture and that same sickly sea stench. The sky was a brooding canvas, light struggling to pierce through the overcast blanket. On the path leading around to the cliffside, the usually bustling morning routines of my neighbors were conspicuously absent. Doors shut, curtains drawn, it felt staged, rehearsed. The only noise was the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant, muffled protests of the waves. Reaching the cliff's view, the sight should have been calming, an expanse of water meeting sky. But it felt dense, visually hard to digest, like looking through smeared glass. Then, from the corner of my vision, something caught the scant light, a glint not of water, but metal. I turned, finding nothing but the gorse bushes and a stray piece of fencing wire swinging lightly in the breeze. Must have been my imagination, or tired eyes. As I turned to head back, a low groan echoed, a boat maybe, lost in the fog. Except this was different, more pained. Against better judgment, I followed the sound, the cliffs echoing it back at times, making it hard to pinpoint. I ended up at the edge of Miss Peabody's fence, her garden gnomes grinning eerily at my intrusion. The groaning stopped abruptly, replaced by a sudden, sharp crack from somewhere close by. My heart skipped as I looked down at my feet, expecting to see the earth giving way, but there was just grass, dew-laden and cold. I should have turned back, chalked it up to sleep deprivation or the aftereffects of cheap coffee. But there, sticking out from under a hedge, clear as day, was a weather-beaten envelope, heavy with moisture, and addressed simply to the newcomer. As ridiculous as it might sound, taking that envelope might have been the biggest mistake of my life. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope, its cream paper a stark contrast against the dark veins of coffee splashed across my kitchen table. Inside, the most ordinary thing of all, a photograph. But as I stared down at it, a prickle ran up my spine. It wasn't the image that was unsettling. It depicted a simple house, pale and nondescript, swallowed by tangles of overgrowth. But the memory it dragged from the depths of my mind, scratching at the doors of my consciousness. How had I forgotten that house? My childhood home, where shadows lingered longer than they should, and whispers seemed to echo through the halls, even in the dead of night. The rest of the afternoon, I sat paralyzed by the flood of memories, each more unwelcome than the last. That night, sleep eluded me. The house haunted my thoughts, a persistent ghost, until a reckless idea took root. I had to go back. Just to see it, just to prove to myself it was real and powerless, that I had grown beyond the fears of a child. When I arrived the following day, the town seemed smaller, its skyline more suffocating than I remembered. The drive felt both foreign and overly familiar, each turn in the road a convergence of past and present. When the house finally came into view, my heart stuttered. It was exactly as in the photo, yet undeniably different. The overgrowth was thicker, the desolation more absolute, as if the house was both frozen in time and crumbling against it. Something moved behind a cracked window, a swift, dark blur. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a small animal. Shaking off a chill, I approached the front door, the wood swollen with damp, begrudgingly giving way as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. I tried flicking the light switch, but no bulbs lit. The electricity had probably been cut years ago. My phone's flashlight cut a narrow path through the gloom, and I followed it through the house, memories lurking around every corner, tainting each step with dread, but goading me deeper into the labyrinth of deteriorating walls and sagging floors. In what was once my room, the wallpaper peeled like dry skin, and the carpet squelched softly beneath my feet. Something was different, an unsettling quality I couldn't quite identify. As I stood there, a cold breeze whispered through a crack in the window frame, carrying with it a child's giggle, a sound I remembered all too well, yet hoped I had imagined. My skin crawled. It was a sound that had once filled these halls, something I had convinced myself was the product of a lonely, overly imaginative child. But now, standing amidst the decay of childhood, it was unmistakably real. I turned to leave, to flee the crushing embrace of the house, but stopped short. Drawn almost magnetically, I descended into the basement. Each step down those creaking stairs felt like a descent into somewhere far deeper than the house's foundations. The air grew colder, denser. At the bottom, my light flickered over something unnatural. Markings etched into the dirt floor, not quite symbols, not quite random scratches, jagged and deep as if made in fervor. My breath fogged in the air as I knelt to trace them with a hesitant finger. And then silence, pure, oppressive silence. It fell so suddenly that my ears rang. The darkness seemed to solidify, pressing in around me. I couldn't move, couldn't think, only exist in that timeless void until the light returned with a suddenness that made me gasp. Frantically, I swung the beam around, half expecting to see something unspeakable. But there was nothing, only the stale, empty air of an abandoned basement. I rushed up the stairs, stumbling in my haste, desperate to see daylight. When I emerged, it was late afternoon. Sunlight seemed oddly muted, as if strained through a veil. My car was where I left it, untouched, but as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, nor silence the childlike giggles that now seemed to echo in the rustling leaves behind me. When I finally reached home, uneasy relief washed over me. But it was short-lived. That night, as I lay in bed trying to convince myself it was over, a soft thump came from the living room. Frozen, I listened as faint, dragging footsteps approached my bedroom door, which creaked open with agonizing slowness. In the slit of dark between door and frame, two gleaming eyes stared in at me, and the same child's giggle I'd heard earlier whispered through the crack. I knew then that whatever I'd brought back with me wasn't just a memory, and it wasn't done with me yet. The shadows stretching across my living room seemed to deepen, pooling into the corners like dark blood. A low hum vibrated through the walls, growing steadily as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. It felt as though the house itself was aware, breathing, waiting, ensnared in whatever wickedness I'd unknowingly invited in. I drew the curtains shut, an attempt to keep the outside world at bay, and perhaps to shade myself from what was lurking within. Curling up on the couch, I clutched a mug of tea, its warmth a small comfort against the chill that seeped into my bones. My memories of that day at the old Winterson house were fragmented, like shards of a broken mirror. I had gone there, subsumed by the fascination of its lore. Whispers in the village spoke of screams heard in the hollow darkness, of shadows that moved against the logic of light. I was a fool, thinking myself a mere visitor, a watcher. But something had followed me home, slithering silently in my wake. The hum turned into a low moan, seeming to emanate from the very foundation of the house. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound burrowed deep, resonating within my skull. My eyes darted frantically, searching for any change in the suffocating normality of my living room. Everything was as it always had been, yet everything was tainted, corrupted by what I had brought back. My cat Percy, usually a slumberous ball at my feet, was now upright, his spine arched, fur bristled, as he stared intently into the darkened hallway. His sudden, spitting hiss jolted me, and his unblinking gaze followed something unseen move. I squinted, straining to see what Percy saw, but there was nothing but shifting darkness. Struggling to my feet, I edged towards the hallway. My heart hammered against my chest with each reluctant step. The moaning grew louder, more desperate, a wail of something both less and more than human. The air turned heavy, difficult to breathe, as if I were pushing through invisible, suffocating drapes. "Who's there?" My voice was a choked whisper, disbelieving of its own fear. No answer came, but the temperature dropped, breaths visible in the air, and my skin erupted in goosebumps. I reached the threshold of the hallway, the darkness palpable, oppressive. From the deeper shadows, a whisper brushed my ear, so close it might have been lips grazing my lobe. "You're home." It was a voice, if it could be called that, more like a sigh carried on the wind through abandoned places. I spun around, heartbeat thundering in synchrony with a rising panic. Percy bolted, disappearing under the dining table. It was a clear sign, more potent than any human words of warning. I should flee, I should escape. But this was my home, my sanctuary. Where would I go? Every room felt suddenly alien, every creak and groan of the aging house a sinister murmur. I retreated to the kitchen, the most brightly lit room, and rifled through drawers until my fingers closed around the cold reassurance of a flashlight. Armed with this meager defense, I made my way back to the living room, the beam of light slicing through the darkness. The normalcy of uncovered furniture, the bookshelves, the television, mundane anchors in the surging tide of my fear, offered me little solace. Each shadow seemed to tremble with potential threat. Just as I was convincing myself to dismiss it all as a nerve-induced fantasy, a picture frame on the mantelpiece caught my attention. It was an old family photo that had rested there for years. But now it was askew, angled so the faces of my smiling parents looked distorted, drawn into silent screams. Muscles tensed, I realigned the frame, but my fingers brushed against the surface of the glass. It was not just cold, it was icy, as though it radiated a chill from within. Somewhere in the recesses of my tormented mind, alarm bells rang. The glass should not be that cold. Not in here, not now. Whispers filled the room again, more insistent, swirling around me in the shadows, intimate and threatening. I swung the flashlight around wildly, desperate to locate the source, to prove to myself I wasn't mad. And that was when I saw it, just for a split second, reflected in the window's glass behind me, a form, hazy, indistinct, and undoubtedly there. I whirled around, flashlight trembling in my grip, but nothing was there. Or perhaps it was always just behind me, where my eyes couldn't see, where the light didn't reach. A sob caught in my throat. This was no mere memory. Whatever had come back with me from Winterson House was here, manifest and malevolent. And as the last light of day died, it was clear to me, chillingly clear. It wasn't done with me yet. It wasn't done with me yet. The scratch on the window became a persistent screech, as if whatever was outside was using not just nails, but the entire force of its being to get inside. Each sound was a sharp jab of terror in my chest. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. The glass, fogged slightly by my breath moments before, now shook in its frame. I should have gone back to bed, pretended it was all a bad dream spurred by too many late-night horror movies. But instead, my feet carried me towards the source of the sound, each step reluctant and heavy on the cold wooden floor. As I moved closer to the blurred window, the street light outside cast a dim glow into the room, forming eerie patterns that danced across the walls. The rational part of my brain told me to turn away, to lock myself in the bathroom until morning. But another part, perhaps the primal part, needed to see, to know. When I reached the window, my hands trembled as they brushed against the cold pane. The screeching stopped abruptly, plunging the room back into silence so thick it buzzed in my ears. I wiped the glass with the sleeve of my sweater, heart skipping as the condensation cleared. Outside, the darkness seemed to press against the glass, hungry and waiting. At first, I saw nothing, and a foolish wave of relief washed over me. Maybe it was nothing, just the wind or a branch, or... Then I saw it, a shadow, or rather a misshape of darkness, darker than the night itself, lingering just beyond the light's reach. My breath hitched. It moved, undulating slightly, edges blurring and reshaping, as if deciding on a form before my very eyes. A wave of nausea hit me as the shadow began to creep forward, into the light. It was unnervingly slow, deliberate. Its movements suggested intelligence, patience. The closer it got to the light, the more distinct it became. The form no longer just a shadow, but something tangible, horrifying. My mind refused to fully comprehend it, limbs too long, angles too sharp, a grotesque parody of a human figure. I should have screamed or ran or done anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I was transfixed, caught in the gaze of something utterly alien, yet familiar in its terror. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, an abomination against all natural laws. Then it stopped moving, and though it had no eyes, I felt it watching me. The street lamplight flickered, and in that brief dance of light and shadows, it changed again, now closer than before, a mere foot from the window. My throat closed up, eyes stinging with unshed tears of fear. I was a statue, worshipping at an altar of dread. There was a soft thud against the glass, so light yet somehow filled with malice. Then another. It wanted in. This realization finally broke the spell. I stumbled backward, feet tangling in the blanket I'd left haphazardly on the floor earlier. As I fell, the back of my head made sharp contact with the corner of the coffee table. Wincing in pain, disoriented, I managed to turn my head back towards the window. The figure, the thing, was gone, but the threat remained, palpable in the room like a thick smoke. I dragged myself up, fumbling for my cell phone. The screen remained dark, unresponsive. The battery was dead. I had forgotten to charge it. A groan escaped my lips, not only from the pain throbbing at the back of my head, but from the suffocating fear. I needed to leave, city limits, even the state. Anywhere but here. As I got to my feet, steadying myself against the cold wall, the room seemed to settle. Maybe it was gone. The silence broke with a crisp, lurking creak from the hallway floorboards. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't my imagination. It was inside. With leaden feet, I turned toward the doorway just as a cold draft brushed against my neck, carrying with it a whisper, a raspy, almost apologetic hiss, like the last breath escaping a dying mouth. "You shall not leave." Hands shaking, legs weak. I knew then the nightmare was far from over.